So it's getting time for me to start putting that Triumph motor back together, and I ran the cases through the parts washer and I just wasn't very happy with the way it came out. It still came out really dingy. It removed a lot of that heavy grease and dirt, but it wasn't to a point where I felt comfortable laying down some primer and starting to paint it. So I talked to a friend of mine. He said you can use this dollar store all-purpose degreaser and get it really, really clean. So I went to the dollar store, bought some, and tried it on one side of the cases, and it turned out so good. Like, that is so clean for $1. It blew me away. Maybe not as clean as like vapor blasting or like sandblasting, but for $1, that's about as good as you get. And here's a little before and after. The case on the left is the one I did before, and the case on the right is the one I'm going to do in this video. So you can see a little bit before, and this is even after I sent it through the parts washer and even put it in evaporust overnight to get as much off of it as possible. So it's already fairly clean, all things considered. So the things that you're going to need, first of all, is obviously the dollar store all-purpose degreaser. I used a broken wire brush because I don't have any ones that aren't broken. And then a smaller wire brush, a Scotch-Brite pad, and I'm using a tub to clean it in just because I don't want to get my bench all dirty. So the first thing that you need to do is completely soak the part that you're cleaning. And you're going to want to get it really wet and let it sit for a while and let that degreasing compound start to work on the grease and the oils and the dirt that's deep inside the pores of the case. And I tried a brass brush and I tried the plastic bristle brushes, and they didn't work quite as well. The brass brushes left a little bit of a brass finish on it, and the plastic bristle one just didn't pull out quite as much dirt. And then once it's sat for a little while, spray it again and just start going at it with your wire brush. And I noticed that it starts to work a little bit better if you've got a lot of the degreaser on the actual surface itself. It seems like it pulls it out more and starts to foam up a little bit, like you can see here, if you've got a lot of the degreaser on there. Like if you were scrubbing it dry, it doesn't really pull it out quite as well. So I squirt it down every so often just to make sure I'm pulling as much of it out as possible. Now I'm working on the bottom side of the case, and this is where, if you know Triumphs, that's where all your oil's leaking out constantly. And so you're going to get a lot of that oil and grit build up here that's going to be really deep inside the pores of the case. So we already got quite a bit of that grease out. You can see a little before and after. The smaller wire brush that I use doesn't have quite as firm of bristles as the bigger brush does. So when I'm removing a lot of when I'm hitting a spot that has a lot of dirt in it, I like to use the harder bristles and then come back with the softer bristles. And this also works really well on old gaskets and build up around gaskets. I think a lot of that is just because you're scrubbing on something that's kind of wet and you've let it soak for a while. But I hesitate to use the razor blade technique, because no matter how hard I try to not cut into the case or the edge or whatever I'm cleaning gasket off of, I always end up taking a chunk out of. I've heard that if you keep it really vertical, it's the best way to do it, but I still end up like shaving off parts of aluminum. But this worked really well, and I was really happy with the amount of gasket it actually took off. But what I was saying with the different amounts, the different hardness of the bristles on the wire brushes, you don't want to use a really, really hard wire brush because you'll scratch the case or like the gasket surface. you want to use a brush that's fairly soft, because some of those brushes can be really, really harsh, and unless you're planning on buffing it down later and really taking off some of the aluminum, I would just err on the side of using a softer brush. So now you can see a little before and after of the gasket before and after. Then I'm going to continue to work on the rest of the case, just getting in those little grooves and hitting everywhere I can, working on that base gasket on the cylinders. One thing that really helps is if you've got a little bit of grime deep in some corner somewhere, if you just let a pool sit in there in the little corner for a little while, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes, scrub on it, let it sit for 10 minutes, scrub on it. That's the best way that I noticed to get all that out, because it's just really hard to get deep into some of those grooves, but kind of eats away the grease every time you clean it out. So the general order I went in to clean up the aluminum was I'd use the hard brush to get as much of the big dirt out as possible. Then I'd move to the smaller, softer bristle brush, and then to the Scotch-Brite, and then flood it with more of the degreaser and then wipe it off. And that seemed to be a really good way to get as much off as possible. I think it's kind of like running through the grits when you're sanding wood or whatever. You want to start with the most coarse and end up with the finest grit or bristle or whatever. I'm also okay using a fairly coarse bristle brush on this case because it's already all scratched up and it's pretty aged. But if you're working on a side cover or a primary cover that has like a mirror finish, definitely use caution and try out your different types of bristles and different Scotch-Brites to make sure that you're not going to cause some damage to your part that you're cleaning up. I don't want to be responsible for you ruining your mirror finish on anything. And like I said, this is just something I just barely picked up from a friend of mine, and there might be a better way to do it, but it's pretty easy to do. It's $1 for one of those bottles at the dollar store. It took me maybe 20 minutes to clean it all up, and it turned out fantastic. I was super happy with the finish. You can't beat vapor blasting, but for a cheap alternative, if you want to put a little elbow grease into it, this way is perfect. Or for me, like when I'm prepping, I'm just prepping this for paint. I just want to get out a lot of those oils and get the surface roughed up enough that the primer and paint's actually going to stick, and it's perfect for this. And then once you've gone over the whole thing pretty good and you feel like you've got a lot of the dirt off of it and it's starting to get a really nice color and shine to it, you're going to want to finish it off by cleaning it up with some Dawn dish detergent and running it under your sink, because that's going to get rid of any of the chemicals and any of the leftover dirt and stuff that you didn't get out with the brushes. And here's the finished product. So you can even see like this is significantly better than even the first time I did it. And that, I think a lot of that is because I used that Dawn dish detergent after, and it cleaned up the surface and made it look really, really good. So the one I just barely finished makes the previous one I cleaned up look dirty. So if you compare the one I just finished to it before I started cleaning it, it's night and day. It doesn't even look like the same metal. So let me know what you think, if there's a way that you've seen to do this better or a cheaper way. Or if you have any comments or concerns about this, let me know. I'll do my best to get back to the comments, but this worked really great for me, so hopefully it works great for you. So now all I have to do is put this engine back together and hope that I don't forget any of the pieces.